It's big, it's gold, it's beautiful. Welcome to the Palace of Versailles, where royal ambition, architectural expertise, and a giant ego built one of the most famous chateaux in the world. Strap in, this is the palace that was built by a guy whose nickname was the Sun King, because everything was supposed to revolve around him. Located just 10 miles outside of Paris, Versailles started as a humble hunting lodge. But then Louis XIV, aka the Sun King, decided to make it the center of his universe, or rather France. And for a few centuries, his dream became a reality. Because this place wasn't just a palace, it was an ideology, decorated in marble and mirrors. Versailles became the symbol of absolute monarchy. Every hallway here says, "Bow down, because I am king." Louis XIV became king at 5 years old upon the death of his father. His mother ran his kingdom while he was underage, with plenty of opposition from rebelling nobles. Traumatized by all the fighting, Louis was determined to bring everyone to heel as soon as he reached his majority. But it was really a visit to the home of his finance minister, Nicolas Fouquet, that pushed Louis to build Versailles. Fouquet had built a magnificent chateau called the Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte about 40 miles away from Versailles, and when King Louis visited, he was beyond impressed. He was actually quite furious. Here was a chateau that was spectacular, better than any of Louis's royal palaces. Louis accused Fouquet of embezzling from the state coffers, threw Fouquet in jail, and seized his chateau. He also took over Fouquet's chateau design team, architect Louis Levaux, landscape designer André Lenotre, and painter Charles Lebrun. He gave them a brief. He wanted a palace that screamed power. And the place for this new palace was going to be that old hunting lodge in Versailles. Under the Sun King, the Château de Versailles expanded into a 2,300-room extravaganza, surrounded by 800 hectares of garden. The goal? Impress allies, intimidate enemies, and keep the nobles distracted. And that's because Versailles wasn't just a palace, it was a stage. Nobles and their entourages were all expected to follow elaborate rules of etiquette, all the while dressed in their best attires. Louis imposed a strict dress code, insisting on the finest materials. This meant that all the nobles of the land spent their money on outfits, bankrupting themselves, instead of being able to pay soldiers to cause trouble. Power was determined by your proximity to the king. The closer you were, the more powerful you became. Lords and ladies were expected to live on-site rather than in the comfort of their own homes. And they were required to participate in a dizzying schedule of rituals, from watching the king wake up, to him getting dressed, to him brushing his teeth, elaborate dinners, competitive bowling, party nights. It went on and on. Getting invited to hold the royal chamber pot? This was a promotion. All these rules and etiquette had a purpose, to keep everyone too busy to plot a rebellion. While they were jockeying for position at the breakfast table, Louis XIV ran the country. Genius, right? And all the while, construction at Versailles was ongoing. Between the palace and the gardens, construction at Versailles went on for over 40 years, while the nobles and royals were living on site. As you can imagine, living conditions were not great, as the best accommodation was given to those close to the king. In addition, Louis was quite the taskmaster. Workers were expendable if it meant he could expand bigger, higher, and faster. Thousands of workers died to build the palace, as at the time there was no such thing as workers' rights. The lack of surrounding amenities added to the deplorable health conditions. Records show that the first cause of death at the Palace of Versailles amongst the workforce was undernourishment and disease. The palace also stank, since bathing was not common. At the time there was no running water, no private rooms, even for the lords and ladies. Versailles was not for the faint-hearted. Nevertheless, it was the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles that was the place to be. This was the Instagram wall of 17th century France. 17 windows on one side, 357 mirrors on the other. It was where Louis was going to walk through as the headliner of his day. And it's not just fancy. There's a hidden political message behind all this. The mirrors were expensive, and the place to get them was from Venice in Italy. But Louis didn't want to rely on the Venetians, so a new industry began at home. Louis had artisans trained, and a new mirror industry launched just to finish this room. Beyond the palace are the extensive gardens and the Grand Canal. But, like everything else, this was not easy to do at Versailles. This is one of the few chateaux in France that is not located near a river, so artificial sources of water needed to be created. Engineer extraordinaire André Lenotre designed a system of hydraulics and canals to bring running water to the chateau from the Seine River that was not exactly nearby, but he managed it anyway. He built underground aqueducts to supply the water to the palace and to power the fountains with an elaborate system of pipes and faucets. The Grand Canal, designed by Lenotre, is over 1 mile long, and you can even go boating on it. The fountains on the canal were set to dance to music in the king's time. Water pressure? Not so great. So actually, they would only turn on the fountains when the king was nearby as he strolled past. The ultimate VIP treatment. Fast forward to the 18th century, and we have the entrance of a certain Marie Antoinette. The Palace of Versailles was the capital of elegance by the time the Austrian Marie Antoinette married the Sun King's great-great-grandson, Louis XVI, more than 200 years later. By this time, the formality and etiquette rules of the royal court had become so ingrained and elaborate that Marie Antoinette took to fleeing to the Petit Trianon to escape from the stifling conditions of the main chateau. She even built a fake rustic village called the Hameau de la Reine, where she could play milkmaid. It was like a rural theme park for royals. Cute, yes, but expensive. And while the queen was pretending to churn butter, the people of France were, let's just say, not thrilled. In 1789, the French Revolution hit Versailles like a ton of bricks. The royal family was forcibly taken back to Paris. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette lost their heads, and Versailles, abandoned, looted, and stripped of its furniture. By the time Napoleon Bonaparte became emperor in 1804, the palace was in bad shape. Napoleon made the Château de Fontainebleau nearby his base instead of the Palace of Versailles. He wanted to distance himself from the excesses of the previous royal house, which was really only 10-15 years earlier. But the bones of the Château de Versailles remained, and in the 19th century the palace was reborn, not as a royal residence, but as a museum of French history. Relief for the chateau was short-lived, though. The Prussian army turned the Palace of Versailles into its headquarters during the Siege of Paris of 1870 and turned the Hall of Mirrors into a hospital. This is also where World War I ended. This is where the Treaty of Versailles was signed, declaring the end of the war. And then came World War II. As the war was approaching, Versailles' curator Pierre Ladoué took steps to protect its works. Thankfully, major artwork and the woodwork pieces were removed and sent to the Loire Valley to be hidden. The palace would more or less remain standing during the war, with most of its treasures safely ensconced away. Today, the Palace of Versailles is one of the most visited sites in France, along with the remaining an official government building, with the Congress of Versailles still being held here. During these occasions, the President of France addresses both houses of Parliament, the National Assembly, as well as the Senate. This is similar to the King's Speech in the United Kingdom or the State of the Union in the United States. You can tour the castle on most days, unless there is an official function, along with the gardens, the Hameau of Marie Antoinette, and the Trianon. And don't forget to visit the carriage house, which is located across the street from the palace and is free to enter. For more information on how to get to the Palace of Versailles, there is a link in the description to my website for more details about visiting the chateau from Paris. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories from France and beyond. Thanks for watching. À bientôt.